Okay, we're very, very glad to have Brian C. Short here today to talk about his excellent novel, The New People of the Flat Earth. And yeah, well, welcome to Watkins Books. And,
thank you. It's good to be here.
First off, could you tell us a bit about the title, maybe?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of funny because the title, I knew even before I started writing the book that was the title. New People of the Flat Earth was what the title had to be. But I didn't know why. And now, some like 12, almost 14 years later, I've finally clued in why it is called what it is. And it's, I had thought that there was like a nice tension between the like flat Earth, this kind of retrogressive thing, but then new people being like an evolutionary sort of like force moving contrary to that, which is nice, but it doesn't really go to the depth of whatever it's supposed to. But what it is, and it was just reading a thread in, oh God, this requires some context. Reading a thread in a website based on a podcast, it's not even worth trying to describe. It's basically somebody's response to an interview on a podcast that I had nothing to do with, but I listened to. And he said that this is like, it's about people experiencing, UFOs and contact with aliens or visitors or whatever. These people talk on this podcast. And he was saying, well, it's like, the flat earthers coming up against the three-dimensional reality. And I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what this is about. That's what the book is about, is what is it? It's a long sort of meditation on contact with a greater sense of mind, something that has a higher perspective. And from our perspective, or from the protagonist's perspective, we're limited in living our human lives and seeing and knowing as much as we do. But what happens when a person comes into contact with, call it alien or whatever, just different, some different form of mind? What does that look like? How does that feel? What's the feeling tone that carries throughout, and how does that warp your expression or the expression of the world around you? And how could this higher mind or whatever express itself through the details of reality? So these are the questions that I'm really inspired by and caught up with trying to express. And so, flat Earth meets 3D object, it's that discrepancy and that push towards evolution on a conscious level that I'm trying to, not that I know what that is, but it's an expression of how that feels, how I think that feels.
Is there a link to Abbott's Flatland? Are you aware of Abbott's Flatland? He describes the phenomenon that a two-dimensional being is confronted by a three-dimensional being enter his space, and first he sees it as a point and then as a circle, and then the circle enlarges and shrinks and disappears again.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, the limited perspective of the larger object, of the multidimensional object, which you have no idea, no concept of what 3D is, because you're 2D. But this is how it expresses itself in your world, which is this weird thing which just seemed flat on. Yeah, it would be a point, then it would be a line that grows, then it would be a line that goes like that. And
now, Abbott was kind of on the level of the three-dimensional being in relation to the two-dimensional. And would you say, you as the author, you have the awareness of the higher dimensional being describing? Are you more like Proteus?
I'm more like Proteus in the two-dimensional world, kind of encountering this higher mind and puzzling over what it is.
Okay.
But I suppose that sort of throws up an interesting point about construction, is that, like, how did you, as you edited your work or rewrote parts of it, did you have that kind of point of view, as you're sort of describing, of like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tweak this, or I like the way this falls in the sequence, or it was like how does like the kind of like the writer's mind, if you like, kind of impose itself upon upon the speeches or the characters within it.
Yeah.
As a hard-dimensional being, let's say.
Yeah, well, obviously, on some level, I have to try and put myself into that perspective in order to have a full picture of the book, and that's really an intuitive process. It's not so much just an imaginary process, but it is a process of kind of feeling my way through the intuitive, through my own intuitive process. But it's also based in some degree on experiences that I've had with just UFOs and odd phenomena and things like that have really led me to contemplate this, because I feel, maybe I'll sound crazy, perhaps not so much in this context, but I feel like at times in my life something has interacted with me, and that's been a real motivating force in almost everything that I do, particularly in creative work, is to try and connect with what that might be or what I feel that is within me, and to try and do that with a certain amount of fidelity if possible, or just with trueness to its impulse, which always involves a certain amount of filtration through my own personality and my own experience and my own, imagination. It's always reaching towards something higher, but at the same time, it's like I do feel that I've had encounters with something. So I try to, either let that speak through me or try to project some part of myself into it to see what it might say. And the book is, it's playful. It's not, I'm not trying to express, truth about, quote unquote, the big T truth about, what the higher mind is and how we should live in response to it. But it is more a human response that I hope at times is funny, as the character goes stumbling through the labyrinths of his own mind and trying to relate or be related to this higher mind. So
I think, although you're maybe not laying out the kind of like the Ten Commandments, you do capture the truth of the experience. That comes across really strongly. Just the sort of like that kind of powerful, not almost like the waking mind kind of remembering dreaming is not the same as obviously the dreamer having the dream in it, and you somehow manage to get behind that kind of waking mind and say, I'm sort of right about this space that we all sort of experience, I suppose, from time to time in our dreams, in mystical experiences and in contactee experiences. So it's like that kind of powerful sense of the numinous, of the uncanny, really sort of comes across. How did you? Not to be too glib, but like if this book was like a perfume, and you were trying to sort of like distill the essence of kind of, you were trying to sort of like get someone to smell this experience. But how would you kind of characterize the kind of like the atmosphere you're trying to generate through the book?
Vinegar. Maybe lemon juice, but definitely acidic, Yeah, no, that's very insightful reading of it. Thanks. Because I'm fascinated by this, by the numinous, by the quality of dreaming and how that feels. That's what I'm always trying to capture, because that's really what inspires me. Is that sense of just disorientation within it, but also the awe in the face of it, and because it's just so important to me as a human being, stumbling through life. That's what I try to capture in whatever I'm doing, artistic wise.
Yeah. You seem to be interested in like the fracturing of the subject, and can you like talk about that? The way that the Sheriff Friendly and Proteus and I are like all these kind of fragments, or parts of the souls of like maybe, if not a single being, but like definitely like a kind of, you get a sense of like something kind of as the worlds split away and the descriptions of and the points of view of each of these characters, or our point of view of them, I should say. Like how describe that? Like how did you work through that as a sort of.
Again, this is maybe a non-answer, but I'll try and elaborate as much as possible. It's an intuitive process. Obviously, I can't chart that all out and say, here's, bit A, bit B, bit C, and here's how they interrelate. Or I can, but that tends to fall kind of flat if I do that. But it was just a sense that there's kind of a natural explosion of the subject that seems to happen. Again, maybe this is I'm losing words here. It's a result, perhaps, of coming up against that thing bigger that you kind of lose coherence, maybe. I'm struggling to justify why I did what I did without knowing actually why I did it, which I hope is valid. But I think at the same time you get a better sense of a total picture from all these different angles kind of accessed randomly, non-linearly, than you do through just a straight kind of narrative arc, or the straight experience of a subject. So again, to break it apart and look at it from all these different angles, first there's Proteus, but then there's also Officer Friendly, who might be an inverted version of Proteus. It just seemed to come quite naturally. It's like that was how it kind of needed to be expressed, as far as I could tell. I don't think I could have done it any otherwise, But at the same time, it made for a very difficult plot line, if you will, to keep coherent. And I don't know that I did, but it makes it very complicated to keep all these pieces straight, that they interrelate into a more or less coherent whole. But again, it just kind of seemed to be not only the natural way, but also the way that was a lot of fun. It's like that was what I wanted to do, and so I did it. And it just seemed a better approach than trying to draw it all out from A to B to C.
Yeah, it might have been a misinterpretation, but I had a feeling that every character entity is Proteus. It's a consciousness, and Proteus is one of the manifestations, the most defined, because he's the shapeshifter, meaning encompassing everything, what's going on, and so every one appearing in the novel is a kind of a new perspective of the same consciousness, of a phenomenon that's beyond explanation or definition.
And that's a totally valid reading of the whole thing, and not entirely unintentional. It was, at the same time, it's like, what is a dream? A dream is like the many facets of your own character, and maybe it's something else speaking through it as well. But basically, it's the mind speaking to the mind, which is kind of what a writer does by default in creating a novel. It's like it's all coming out of your mind, so therefore you are, in some degree, everything that's in it. So it's kind of just taking the act of writing to a slightly meta level, in that it's, self-consciously doing that. But I think that's, I don't want to say that that's necessarily the final truth, but I think that's like one extremely valid way of looking at it.
Also, I enjoy very much that you stress the playfulness of the novel. For example, the description of the book, you find, stresses its search for meaning, which then goes again in very, very deep philosophical aspects, and then it kind of, you go with Proteus to a search of meaning, and you won't find it.
Maybe if I ever find meaning, then I'll be able to write a book about that. But for now, it's all about kind of like the struggle and the longing, and
so. But the journey, the journey is ever so fascinating.
Well, it's, the motivation for the journey, but thanks to, looking for meaning, or for, some kind of internal coherence, or, some key that'll make it all feel all right, or, whatever it is. But thank you,
Your way of talking about objects is fascinating in the book. Everything from the sheriff's magic items, his gun, his hat, his badge, and also like the Nikon camera as well, the sort of photography aspect of it, and also obviously the ever-present sort of feeling of the donut hole, this kind of metallic sphere, the Mosquito. So how do you like to what's your sort of like way of approaching objects artistically? Let's say, what's the sort of way that you when you come across an object, why did you feel like, that's the ones that are going to become the uncanny, sort of the sort of signifier of these?
Well, some of them are objects that are just important to me, like a camera is, is a magical object, and it's a way that I sometimes relate to the world. And I find that by taking photographs, not just little snapshots, although it can be that there's a different kind of interaction that happens with the world around me when I'm like trying to compose it just so, or see it through a certain slice, that becomes its own thing. It's a medium of relation between myself and the world, or a means of kind of connecting the two. So that kind of explains why the camera would be special. I mean, I don't really have much personal relation to the magic objects of the officer's trade.
Well, they almost become like priestly garments. They almost become like this kind of heavily, much more sort of religious and sort of like feeling to them, or sort of very magical feeling you give them throughout the. I suppose as the various characters react to them, or Proteus kind of puts them on or off, or.
Yeah, they become like ritual objects.
Yeah.
Don't
Remind
they?
me of sort of like the leopard skins you might see like Egyptian priests wear, or the kind of or a kind of yogic sort of garb or something. It becomes especially as we sort of get closer to the kind of what officer friendly is, if you like, and Proteus' relationship to that. It's like the idea of I mean, can you speak to sort of ideas about what that office contains, or what is the law, or
Well, the law is obviously a higher law than the law of man. It's like it's kind of like officer friendly is. I don't know how much I've explained that in this book, because I've also written a whole sequel to it. So I don't, when I talk about how that office is explained and how I don't know if I've got enough of that already established in this book or not to make my comments on that make sense. But it's a higher law, and the officer friendly is kind of just there as a gatekeeper, or somebody pulling the levers or allowing it to work through him. He doesn't actually do very much. He's just kind of in a place, wearing the uniform and feeling, as Proteus does, rather unfit for the role. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Well, the law is working through you, some force is working through him, and he has the magical objects, which are really, like, you can think of them as like the wands and the cups and the shields and the what's the Aries, with the sword. You can think of them in that terms as representing the elements of magical ritual. But very much they become characters in and of themselves, and they just tend to serve to tie the worlds together and symbolize the function of this higher law as it expresses itself through the works of man. I mean, it kind of all comes back to what is this higher mind, and how is it arranging events, and that is kind of the question that I'm trying to get to more than anything. Is like, how does a mystical, or how does a numinous express itself through the details of everyday life? Just walking down the streets, how does that seem? I mean, you might look at it in a conspiratorial kind of sense, that like everything kind of takes on this ultra significance of meaning, even though it in itself may not have that meaning, or shouldn't have that meaning. It's just like, a pigeon on the sidewalk, or a flag waving in the sky, or whatever it is. Somehow, if it starts to express, the nature of the numinous, then it's suddenly very meaningful, but you don't know how. And again, that's what I'm reaching for, is that sense, that feeling of connecting with the other through all of these details. And if I'm successful in this at all, then everything starts to feel very much like you're lost inside of a dream. And inside of a dream, everything has significance, whatever it is. Every detail is there because some part of your mind made it. And it made it for a reason, to express something, to express something that's very deep in your own unconscious, that, it may not seem like much on the surface, but it is something, So, I don't know if that's an adequate answer to your question.
So I would be interested in the different worlds, like the ordinary world, fake city, in relation to the higher mind. Does it signify remoteness of understanding of the higher mind, possibly?
You can't help but end up speaking of this higher mind as if it's like
Yeah,
a
if we would
particular
know.
coherent thing
Yeah,
that we can
right.
understand, which obviously it could be any number of things that we don't know. But like fake city, and also the
Dead body state.
yeah, exactly, it's a dead body state, and I thought of it as like a place that you might get lost in if you're not really, like the Christ, I can't even remember what the guy's name was. The ghost who he found there, the ghost who Proteus like got kind of attached to down there. That he was, somebody who was just not aware that he was dead, and so didn't quite have the wherewithal to move on to whatever he was moving on to. So it's a limbo state. It's a limbic state. I suppose.
Like in
Yeah.
Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah, it's like not. Yeah, it's like the between death's body state, exactly. And I don't know that I captured that with any sort of fidelity to what it's actually like, because I think if it's like anything, it's like being stuck in a dream. But I don't really know. But this was kind of the structure of this fake city thing that it felt like I needed to go with. But yeah, it's like, what's this mezzanine level between 3D life and whatever's beyond that after death, where you're stuck and you really should see the way out because it's presenting itself all around you, but you can't quite see it because you're too stuck in your own cycles of mind. I wish I could remember my own character's name now, because I feel a little stupid. Yes, Finch.
Yeah.
Yes, the bird. Yeah, Finch. He's based on somebody who is real. And so, like Proteus, without intending to or knowing that he's doing it, acts as a sort of psychopompos, inadvertently a psychopompos to help young Finch find his way out of this, limbic death body state into something else. And he doesn't know that he's doing it, but then again, apparently he's got the capacity to do it, or he's forced into that role. So much of the book is really about being kind of stumbling into a role. Here's your role, here's your given persona, here's what you need to do to be a person, and like feeling utterly at sea with it. It's like, oh my god, I'm human. How do I do that? Oh my god, I'm a policeman. Okay, fine. So it's all a feeling of like, kind of rolling with what you're expected to do, but at the same time knowing that you're not getting it right, knowing that you're really like watching
the way
it.
that different characters will react to that role. As some just take it as straight as the you are the kind of person at the coffee shop, or you are the person with a badge and gun. So it's like, and then the other people will be like, you're not a person who's supposed to be working here. You're not, so like so depending on the interaction with other people as well, it's like your sense of doubt and uncertainty is reflected by like somehow the acceptance or sort of disagreement by
Yeah, because there's always somebody who's like, there you are, that's your job, but then the next person will come along and say like, it's they'll see right through. It's like, well, obviously you're not supposed to be doing this, because you're completely inept. So I love that duplicity, because both are true, or it seems to me like in my life both can be true. You're forced into a role of being, human, husband, father, shop owner, whatever it is that you're doing, and at the same time, it's like people, because you wear the hat for it, they might on first glance just kind of accept you at that thing, but then there's also the person who really knows you going like, or maybe they don't even really know you. Maybe they're just the right person to kind of see through the facade and call your BS. And kind of
I suppose that goes all the way through it in the sense that some characters say, oh, by the way, your soul's fractured, or like you're missing parts of yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas they can see the internal kind of, this kind of imposter syndrome kind of extends all the way through the being. It's almost like, it's not just like your exterior, physical exterior. It's like some people can spot that you're not all there. Some people can say, just to treat you as a single individual.
It's also very frequent trait that people do not remember quite. Is it related to they don't remember quite what their role requires? But there's a lot of people suffering from slight amnesia of. how they came, where they find themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I love that idea of like little lacuna and the things, you know, because I'm suffering them all the time, but it's like you really should know what brought you to the place where you are right now, but for some reason there's just like, you know, a certain amount of your own history that's kind of missing.
Yeah.
And you see that illustrated in like abduction reports of people with their missing time, or things that are just too strange to quite remember, and the efforts that we make through like hypnosis or whatever to try and reconstruct those missing pieces, which themselves may just be constructed pieces. They may be real memories, they may be fabrications, whatever. It's just, you know, kind of drawing lines between what we do remember and what we don't. And so the idea of lacuna is actually a very important one in my work, in the sense of going like, wait a minute, how did I get here again? Right, I'm doing this, you know, but there's something I really ought to know. Yeah, and maybe on some level you really do know, but you don't know that you know. Yeah.
I suppose the contact experience where something multidimensional does arrive, and then you don't quite remember any of it the next day. Like, can you speak about your sort of own experiences, and how, obviously, through the writing of this, you may have discovered stuff about your. I mean, I know you've kind of talked on it, and you've kind of obviously through various. You've done sort of like treatments of hypnosis to see, you know, if you could dig out even more information. Has the writing of this kind of revealed anything to you in terms of your own experience?
Well, like everything, it's like it reveals something about myself, if nothing else, and I don't know if it reveals any of the missing parts of my own, you know, like contact experiences. I mean, to set that up, you know, I do have like certain like consciously remembered experiences of things in the sky or other little bits and pieces that seem to manifest themselves, but I don't remember actual. There's a lot of things that would, following what have become sort of classical patterns of abduction, things that would, in my experience, that would seem to indicate that there is that also, but I don't remember any of that. So again, it's kind of a process of trying to imaginatively reconstruct what might be there, and I don't know that I'm ever actually getting it. I mean, it's, if I'm getting anything, it's that feeling tone of being in connection with this mind, and that's what I'm trying to strive. That's what I'm striving to express with a certain amount of fidelity and humor. But as to the actual like minutia and the content of that, I don't know. And even though I've been through like extensive like hypnosis sessions lately with, you know, with a trained like therapist, you know, somebody who's very good and competent, you know, in that world, I still don't know that any of the stuff that I've pulled out of those sessions is any of it what really happened. And I'll never know. And so I guess just like anybody else who experiences these kind of things, I have to become accepting and, you know, to a degree comfortable with that, carrying around that enigma. Like, you just don't know and probably never will, and, you know, maybe that's okay. But the thing that it does for me is that it keeps impelling me towards trying to express that missing part, that lacuna, you know, that thing that should be there but kind of isn't, but is, you know, and to try and find different forms, and that I find is very lively. That's like an ongoing inspiration. So maybe it's a good thing that I don't remember exactly what happened.
Do you think that like the toolkit, as you're saying earlier on, of like coming at it from different angles, trying this unspeakable, ineffable experience has to be, you know, this wordless experience, let's say, like has to be approached with words from like all different sides. Yeah. And then so like in the sort of way that you've got these kind of different worlds operating around this experience, it kind of gives you a toolkit to kind of approach it from different spaces, you know, conceptual spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of hanging up on the fact that you said coming at it in different angles with words, and I'm thinking like words, yes, words, you know. Sorry, I kind of spacing out here, but it's like words they become their own medium, don't they? And so, you know, how do I start to think of them as almost like worms, kind of like coming in on some kind of spheroid object, like sperm trying to fertilize an egg or something from whatever direction it can reach it at. But it's like it's its own medium. So, you know, how do you use words to express anything? You know, they're expressive of a thought, but also of a certain sensuality. There's, you know, their own shape and color to them. I'm sorry, I'm getting really spacey here, and I'm not even on drugs, you know. So,
well, this is the thing, isn't it? So when one tries to sort of talk about these things, I mean, actually, you know, you're obviously not just a writer. You're a musician and a filmmaker. How do those kind of like fit into this kind of a, you know, they all you're I mean, obviously subjectively speaking, but like your music seems to be in the same sort of like space of like trying to kind of get around this. There's something very kind of uncanny and numinous again. And likewise, you know, of what I've seen of your film work as well. It's like, again, there seems to be something.
Oh my, you have done your homework, haven't you? I'm impressed. Well, any medium that I'm working from is kind of its own approach, you know, and I think maybe that's what I got all hung up on with the words thing, because it is a manner of approach, as is audio, you know, music and whatnot, which is sort of like another angle trying to reach the same thing. And film is yet another angle, you know, a visual angle and an angle of time and expression through time, which also encompasses music and words, it can, and all that. But it's also its own limitation. I don't know, all these different things are things that have been, you know, just have been very natural for me to do since I was pretty young. You know, that I just found that I wanted very much to make movies, I wanted very much to make music, and I wanted very much to write books. And so that's really, it's as simple as that. It's like, that's what I wanted to do so badly. But I do find that working, because I have this mystery that I'm trying to express, that becomes a motivating force for all these different media, you know, that's kind of like the missing central point that I'm trying to, you know, that I'm kind of like circling in this gravity well around, you know. There's not a whole lot of intention behind it. It's just kind of doing what comes naturally. But if I'm able to articulate the process a little bit, then that's kind of nice. You know, particularly in the context of an interview. Yeah.
I think there's that marvelous bit where you've got the photography exhibition and people are like spotting like the mosquito kind of like the orb is somehow in all the photographs, and like it's sort of there, you know, whether or not it was kind of intentional or not. It's like there's this kind of almost like a watermark. It's sort of like it's kind of just sort of occurring. You know, the idea that, you know, you've taken photos of something that can't allow itself to have a photo taken of it.
Right, so. Yeah, and so it doesn't really appear in the photos. It's like a smudge or something, and it's like Proteus doesn't even see it when he just kind of like knows to like, you know, hold the camera up at the sky, you know, take a picture, because something says you got to do this now, you know, and then there's like a smudge on the film or a blot or something comes through the processing, and it's like, but that is, you know, the thing, and of course the, you know, the fundamentalist they recognize the numinous, the fundamentalist Mormons who are taking over the town. They're Gnostic enough to recognize the numinosum of the thing as their angel, and also that one should not express this, you know.
Yeah. And also, I suppose, in a way, that the experience in the monastery at the beginning, it's like the Golden Buddha moment, you know, that kind of sort of starts the ball rolling, for one of again, it sort of almost creates this sort of circumstance where he has the Proteus is then his he can no longer kind of just be in the Zen monastery anymore. You know, it's turned him into something. Well, he's turned his behaviour into something unacceptable to that community. You know? Right.
Yeah, it's really unbalanced him, and that's, you know, both his desire for this strange woman who's come in and really caught his interest, but also, it's like, is she an expression of Mosquito, or is Mosquito an expression of her? Are they kind of the same thing on some level? Because when she comes, it goes, and he can't, his equilibrium, which was probably pretty shaky to begin with, is now, completely lost. And so he's expressing this out of control behavior in his words and whatnot. And so it's natural for him then to leave his, sheltered life within that community, and he has to go in search of this thing, whether he wants to or not. Is it his desire for this woman that's leading him forward, or is it his desire for the higher meaning of his contact with Mosquito? They're both kind of the same thing, even though they may seem to be working in contrary-wise. They're not really. They're both impelling him back out to live in the world again, the world which he's already quit, which he knows he doesn't belong in. And here, everything that happens in the book is kind of proving to him after that. It's like, no, you really don't belong in the world. But he does, he does. The world is, an expression, the sort of conspiratorial expression of meaningfulness is all, Mosquito has presumably got a hand in all of that, It's leading it towards himself by never quite revealing itself to him.
So the kind of like the interplay between like the erotic or like the arousing dimension, like for instance Amanda and the way that she takes the gun and then brings him to almost this epiphany, and like the sort of like the sheriff-friendly Proteus line becomes a sort of a raise, and then you're sort of like in the numinous again, so it's almost like this kind of moment of sexuality and arousal seems to be sort of like almost like on a tantric level, I suppose. The kind of like sex death kind of like moment kind of also triggers some closer way into this experience, like or some understanding of that experience. What do you think? I mean, like how do you see the various female characters in the book?
Well, I just hope that I'm being fair to femininity as a whole, because as a heterosexual male, I tend to relate to women in a particular way. I can't really escape that there is a level of sexuality in all interaction. So I just hope that I'm portraying them as, full people and not just as, sexual aspects of the main character.
But beyond the sexual aspects, there's this kind of mystical...
Yeah, there's again, it's an impulse towards, and call it tantric. I think that's as reliable a label as anything. It is, again, a pull of the numinous that impels the character along. And you'll notice he's never satisfied. He never gets the girl. But Officer Friendly does. Officer Friendly always gets the girl, the one that he wants. But, poor Proteus, he's always left a little, more than a little frustrated.
Yeah.
But again, that's, kind of like its own story. It's its own, like, necessary consequence, given the imbalance in his life, the thing that's moving him along.
It's kind of there's a vanishing point of this thing. You can never you want it, you can't get it, and then it's close but it's so far away kind of thing. So it's either split the novel into 3 books, by the way. Like I was sort of thinking that.
Well, the book was actually I wrote it as 5 books.
Okay.
And when Phil, my editor, approached me, he was also the guy who kind of championed its publication. He wanted to put out one very long book, one big Herkin book, and so it seemed necessary. Well, it seemed reasonable to take the first 3 books because they all follow, the storyline of Proteus, and make them as one. So basically, I thought of them as separate books. I was writing at this point separate books, and now they're kind of just compiled into the one. So in 3 different movements, and you notice they're also following different chapters in his development. And in the first one, it's kind of setting the scene of, his initial conflict and setting his character and setting the dynamics of his interactions with the world and with Mosquito and all of that. Whereas in the second book, Mountain Home, it's like he's kind of found a place finally where he might fit. He's found a place to be, himself and accepted as himself. But no, of course not. That doesn't work. It all falls apart. So the thing is that he needs to keep moving. He needs to. There's always something. The necessity is to be impelled towards this ultimate resolution of some kind of confrontation with Officer Friendly and with Mosquito, and he cannot be content to sit and rest. And then in the third, it's like a summation of a sort. He's gone very far out, literally to the Gobi Desert, Mongolia, and is ultimately, in the most distressed state in a certain way, and but is also coming towards this kind of magical resolution of his own opposite self in Officer Friendly. And then, and then the sequel, if there is a sequel, would be the remaining 2 books, which then follow the through line, or the storyline of Officer Friendly, who's now, kind of his origin story,
right,
and later development. So.
This game they're playing in the ultra world of with the kind of like the bird and the sort of like the fulcrum and things like that. It's sort of like this seems to be, again, it's like you're sort of like the sort of flatland kind of thing. It's like there seems to be kind of obviously the bird, the finch, the window, that kind of sequence as well. It's like the play of this game obviously has this kind of echo that seems to be running through all the worlds, that seems to be like, or you get a sense of like, is this sort of happening at this kind of high dimensional level?
Right, yeah, because you're in the ultra world. Well, it's the ultra world, so it's got to be where the origins of all things are. Unfortunately, it's a donut shop in Los Angeles, which is, a little bland, intentionally so. But here, the game is, not to draw to, A to B of a line of it, but there's some suggestion that this is like the thing that's influencing all of the world. Yeah. It's like this is everything. It's like the gods at play, deciding human fate in a certain way, in a roundabout way in this case,
actually,
in a mistaken way.
It just reminds me of like like the tri-D chess they're playing in Star Trek, and like I think there's an episode where the computer takes over the ship, and like he's like they go to this Orient Express kind of thing, and there's people playing games, and they realise that they're all sort of symbolic of something happening somewhere in the ship, basically. But it's like it's just being rendered as this kind of this game, and do you think? I mean, not to sort of spoil the kind of like the next novel, but like what's what can we look forward to basically in terms of like where you think the story might be going?
Wow. It's funny because on a certain level I've kind of forgotten, I mean, it's actually been a few years. I mean, well, it was a little over a year ago that I finished the last of the 5 books. So I'm kind of like, what did I write again? But where is it going? I mean, I don't want to wrap anything up in it. I mean, it's heading towards an enigma, but it needs to be a satisfying enigma. It needs to be something that makes the reader ask interesting questions as a result of it, or at least that's what I would hope. Rather than wrapping everything up in a nice tight ball, saying, well, here's this mess. Oh, but it all makes sense because it's this. No, here's this mess that kind of resolves itself, but not really. It's like the resultant implied mess afterwards should be interesting enough in its implications that nobody hopefully would feel disappointed by its ending that way, because that's the kind of endings that I've always hoped for, I don't know. I find that so often, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'll just keep going.
No. This is
I find that one of my chief frustrations when I was young with science fiction was that you would get these great setups and these very mysterious kind of worlds being built and odd things happening. And then in the end, it would all be wrapped up as like, well, it was just this, It's like, see, it makes sense. It's like, no, it shouldn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense. It's like, I've always understood that there's like more to it than that. There should be more to a story than it was just this, So that's what I'm trying to suggest.
So I suppose that's the sort of the genre equivalent of the moment where that person turned around to you in the Keith for Roger Rabbit and said, that's just the goddamn Goodyear blimp, It's like a sort of the explaining away, or the please stop looking at that kind of... Exactly.
It's kind of like a collective. The collective in that case was like shutting down. It's
this marvellous thing that's going on can't be experienced anymore. We have to...
So, we can't talk about that. We can't even see that. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you've. It's maybe not fair to reference another interview here, but with the podcast that I did with Jeremy Vaney, he had in a little aside what I was describing that scene, and he said something. Well, God, I hope I can express it. What he said, paraphrase it correctly, but he said something about, well, how do you see the collective if all of us are turning towards the source? That maybe some of us can't be able to do that. And I kind of saw the whole thing in a flash. It's like, that's right. If we're all recognizing ourselves as a source, then maybe that subverts the purpose of experiencing ourselves as individual, like as separate from the source. So in that context, if it was necessary for that guy in front of me in line to experience himself not as source, but as something separate for his own development, well then, if I'm looking at, some representation of the source, he would have to say, that's nothing, don't look at that. That's something else, because his course is leading away from that.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe if I'm lucky in this life, part of my purpose is to look at it and say like, oh, source, what's that?
Yeah.
And like, it's time for me to kind of like turn back towards it and maybe dissolve a little bit into it and let go of being this
You seem to have
separate
quite
self.
a good kind of way of straddling that duality in that case, because it's like you're both looking, you can see both
Looking in
directions,
both ways.
rather than the kind of the zealot who might be, oh, I'm a complete convert to this spiritual experience, I just want to go further in, forget the rest of the world kind of thing.
At times I've thought that I should be that zealot, that pure monk, pure, but it's just boring. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it just doesn't seem that interesting. Not interesting enough. I mean, maybe that's speaking to my level of development, that I'm still kind of like at this, at the crux of my orbit. It's like, oh, what's that? The planet back there that I'm circling around, rather than going further out, whereas the quote-unquote zealot or the one with pure focus is like, no, I'm heading towards source. I got nothing else. I got nothing better to do. I know it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, but it's funny out here, so maybe that's just speaking to my own level of development.
It completely makes sense. Like that sort of the kind of also the kind. Also, kindness isn't right. The way where the kind of so generosity you kind of give to all the kind of like the minutiae of people's lives and their characteristics, and the sort of like the way that life is being lived basically in the what appears to be the realities of those places of each of the worlds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like things are sort of going into the big Om in the sky kind of thing. It's like something there's something kind of marvelous about the sort of the coffee cups and the cigarette butts and the sort of like the people's sort of the worlds that you've kind of built within the novel seem to be kind of like as sort of you have affection for them. Let's say that is that what you say? It's true. Like
yeah, very much so. I think if I didn't feel that way, then I'm somehow falling short in my craft as an author. Just like the details are what bring this experience alive. So I'm glad that you feel that I'm succeeding at that. Yeah.
I was going to say like the professor and the Rubido kind of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like a fascinating kind of moment of you can't get it right every time you try, but you should keep trying nevertheless.
Yeah, he's got his alchemical formula, his alchemical cup of coffee that nobody can make, and